Oh, I was like, I think Chris Williamson is probably Chris. If you're listening to this, you're in the top. You're in the top 5% of males.
No,
I don't want to hear any bitching. The man was on Love Island. Like, he's not average.
great example, like, is Chris Williamson, like, he's leading forward. I know Joe Rogan's also pretty fit.
Pretty fit, man. So that is just like a again, like I know you just said some words, but the unrealistic expectation that people have, because the people you see online, they are the most competent, the smartest, the most fit, right? And so they rise to the top, because if, a million people are all saying the same thing, then the person who has X, Y, Z advantage, and that's going to be good looks, whatever, but they're going to rise to the top. Just that's how it is. And it then skews the expectation of what normal really is. And so then people say things like, Joe Rogan, he's pretty fit. That dude's like 50 years old, fucking a pound of fucking muscle. He's jacked out of his mind. He does Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He's a former like national taekwondo champion. Like, that dude's not just like, that's top 0.001% fit. Not even for his age group. For all age groups. And so like that expectation, I just had to stop you there, because like our expectations of like what it means to be above average are so skewed, because all we see in the media is the above average, and we think that's average. And it's like, dude, like the Elons, the Bezos, the Steve Jobs, they're not the average, but they're the ones we hear about and talk about the most. And therefore they start to become like, oh, that's the standard. It's like, that's not the standard. Like, you're young. Do they do the presidential fitness test in school anymore? Okay. Did you go to school in the U.S. or? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when I was young, we did the presidential fitness test, and they're like, okay, how many pull-ups can you do? How fast can you run this? All right. All that stuff. Right. And it's like you hit the standard. The standard was pretty damn low. So like you could get in the top like 0.01 percentile, but like the standard was the standard over here. It's like, it was pretty damn low. So. Anyway, I'm sorry, cut you off.
No, that's great, because that kind of ties into what I was going to ask, which is that it seems like in today's world, if you're going to have your thoughts heard out, you have to have some level of physical competence being shown. And so that expectation, is set really high because of, these actors like Chris Williams, they're not actors, but like great people like Chris Williams and Joe Rogan. You can even consider Andrew Tate a great example of this, where their words are so much more powerful, and people are more open to listening to them because of their physical competence that is shown. And so I don't know if that's a subject that.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it goes to the idea, again, that all things being equal, the person who has X, Y, Z advantage will rise to the top. So if you're getting business advice to, billionaires, and I've talked about this before. You're getting advice from two billionaires. One's fat, out of shape, has terrible relationships, but he's a billionaire. The other one's fit as fuck, has a great family, he's living like, has tons of friends. It looks like he's like loving life. Who are you more likely to take advice from? Yeah, you're gonna take advice from the guy who has the other stuff too. And so like I tweeted about this a long time ago. Hurt some people's feelings, but like I kind of stand by it. Is that like never take advice from a fat rich person, because they either lack discipline or judgment. Either way, they shouldn't be listened to, right? They might be good at making money, but like, unless you would trade everything about their life for your life, don't take that advice. And I'm talking in like hyperbole to like help frame the conversation, but that's what you're talking about, is like physical competency gives you more credibility, because again, your body is the billboard everybody gets to see. So we know if you've made the deposits. We know if you have willpower. We know if you have discipline. We know like if you are actually doing the physical things that you need to be doing to be in shape. The bank accounts, the philosophical advice, all that other stuff is a little bit harder and a little bit more esoteric. And as the knowledge field becomes more esoteric and less rooted in reality, so philosophers don't have the same high standard of fitness typically. Right? Because we're like, oh, they're talking about this philosophical, esoteric concept. And I imagine they spend all their time in a library reading a book. But if it's anything around like business, making money, or like how to improve your life, you're going to look at them and be like, well, let me see your life. Right? So I think that's a lot of it. But generally, I think if you go into like academia, most academics are not fit. They're not in good shape. They don't necessarily have great relationships. And so it's not wholesale saying like, oh, you have to be physically competent to be to stand out in an intellectual field. It certainly fucking helps though. Right.
Okay, got it. Because then, you made a really cool distinction, which is that you can kind of break intellectual conversation into ones that are more based in reality and ones that are more philosophical. But because of that difference, one side is definitely by nature not going to be thinking of physical fitness as much because their thoughts in nature are so abstract. Whereas the other side, because it's based in reality, they're definitely seemingly going to take their fitness much more seriously because they understand that it's a big.
Well, the easiest place to see this play out is Silicon Valley and startups, right? So Silicon Valley historically has been a very cerebral, very thought-based industry, right? Knowledge workers. So and that's usually attracted people who are very high IQ, very maybe low EQ, but they're more interested in the pursuit of knowledge and creating things from a mental perspective, right? And you think about the quintessential nerd, skinny, pale, pasty. They don't spend much time outside because they're currently grinding away because they're just so focused on this thing. However, that was the trope. But now if you look at the industry and the people, now you start to see, okay, Bezos is fit as fuck. Zuckerberg is fit as fuck, right? And you could say that's because now they're billionaires. They have the time, the resources to put into it. But all downstream, you look at the Tim Ferrisses and the effect that he's had on Silicon Valley and startups culture, and how now there's more of a movement towards biohacking, right? That's a much more common thing now in Silicon Valley for founders to say, oh, I need to get my sleep. I need to do this supplement. I need that supplement. I need to do this exercise routine because Huberman says so, right? And the reason for that is because those people who were in the cognitive domain before, their advantage was their cognitive display of prowess, right? Their ability to exert in that field. Now they're realizing, oh, the cognitive follows the biology. So if I can biohack, if I can optimize my fitness, my nutrition, my sleeping, I can think harder and for longer. And in a world where it's winner takes all, where one Facebook is going to be the Facebook, one Amazon is going to be the Amazon, all of those little advantages start to compound over time. Now, it's not to say that you have to do that stuff, but this goes to an earlier conversation. I don't know if it's part of this episode, but the idea that all things being equal, anybody, if you have any edge in any domain, that could be the things in a world where everybody is so damn good. Now it's just about that little extra edge, and that could be from the physical to the mental.
Mm-hmm. And so then why do you it seems like based on history, maybe it's a cultural shift. It seems like, for example, the US between right after World War II to about the 1990s, it was all about the American man being fit, muscular, and then the 2000s to 2020, it went really soft where the gym
went more androgynous. Yeah. If you look at the what do they call mesotypes, or I don't know. Yeah, the body phenome types. Yeah, where you look at really jacked, more athletic, kind of more like a pencil. You look at males kind of over the cycle. They went from kind of rugged farmers to more Arnold Schwarzenegger gym muscles, and then in the 90s and the early 2000s started to get a little bit more just slimmed down athletic, kind of not even athletic, but more like Edward from Twilight, kind of looks like kind of a feminine masculinity. And then over the last 10 years with everything that's happened around transgender acceptance and all of that, I think that there's been a real move towards this androgenization of the male form. Yeah. And I don't know exactly where that cycle is going to go. I think it's going to rebound back, not towards super jacked. I think we're already seeing it towards the functional fitness, of the hybrid athlete, kind of like the Nick Bears of the world. He's obviously he's a super genetic freak. So I don't think most people are going to get to that degree, but I think most are starting to look at the Andrew Hubermans. Again, he's also a genetic freak. He also looks great for his age and his whole field, right? But I think people are looking at that now and being oh, I want that. Not just because for aesthetic purposes, but because there's a functional value to having muscle, to having to life gets very bad for men when your testosterone starts to drop. Yeah. And so lifting heavy increases your testosterone, eating meat, sleeping, all those things, they increase your testosterone. And we know life expectancy and quality of life is a lot better for males with high testosterone. And it's just been really interesting. You look at the graphs over the last 50, 100 years, how testosterone, the average testosterone in males has plummeted, right? Like grandfathers, our fathers, much higher testosterone rates. You could say, okay, is that an environmental factor? Is it a quality of food? What's happening? Is it a lifestyle thing? Could be all of it, but it doesn't matter. Because now men, their testosterone numbers are like so low. And that's a really good indicator and a predictor of like long-term health and ability to put on muscle. And like muscle, that might sound like an arbitrary thing to care about, but like how much muscle and strength you have when you're young will translate to how much muscle and how strong you are in later life. And the thing that kills people in later life, and the reason the quality of life goes down, is because they lose strength. And they can't withstand the entropy of life anymore. The basic things of just standing up or not falling down the stairs, right? Not breaking a hip. And so that's why this stuff is all very important. Not just because you look good, therefore you feel good, and people treat you differently, you get better results. Huzzah. But also because it's better in the long term. It's the best way to maximize your long-term results on this one merry-go-round of life you get.
When that leads me to the last point here, with all that you've said so far, I remember Alex and when we first was growing up, he said this one thing, and it resonated with me a lot, which is that the world is going to belong to the jacked billionaire. He's like the jacked billionaire who's a nerd. That's who the world's going to belong to in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so if you look through tribal, the evolution of like humanity, the person that probably had the most advantages in the very earliest eras of hunters was the big jacked male. Physical dominance was the thing that mattered. Then as we started to move into hunter-gatherer tribes, that mattered a lot still, but actually wasn't as important as the person who had EQ and could form strategic alliances within the group. And so that person still needed to be physically competent, so they couldn't just be physically overwhelmed, but just being the most physically dominant person wasn't the most important thing, right? And that's typically different than I think people realize. They think like, oh, the warlord was the big, super powerful guy. It's like, not necessarily. Like, he probably was competent, but he probably wasn't the biggest, most strongest badass guy. Like, that's why when they were fighting, he's like, I choose my champion. I'm going to choose the biggest, most badass guy to fight for me, right? Then over time, with the advent of technology and being in a world where it's not just dependent on my ability to physically control or manipulate the relationships in a small context to get work done. Now we have the Industrial Revolution. Now I have a factory worth of people. Now it's not about physical domination. It's about capital domination, right? It's about incentivizing people through other means than just through the physical. So now the person who has more of a cerebral, cognitive, strategic perspective, they're getting ahead. And then that only accelerated then when you go into the technology revolution of like the late 19th century or 20th century rather, where, computers now make it so that the biggest brain in the room fucking wins every time, right? Now we're getting to a point though, where it's like the biggest brain in the room isn't enough, because all the biggest brains in the world have access to all the same information and same resources from the tools. Yeah. So now it's like, okay, the biggest brain with the most energy, the biggest brain with the most social advantages. Yeah. And who's the biggest brain with the most social advantage? Like, social advantages go to the person who's probably has some level of physical prowess, right? Some kind of presence. And so those things start to compound into an advantage after a certain point. And that's like the takeaway there too, is like in a winner takes all game where the whole world is competing against the whole world, any advantage could be the definitive advantage. Now, it is interesting that while Hormozy says the world belongs to the bodybuilding or the jacked billionaire, for the most part, those billionaires weren't jacked in becoming the billionaire. We're only starting to see that a little bit more now than previous, because previously it still was just your pure brain horsepower, right? But now people, I think, are just also starting to realize that like the single-minded pursuit of just building a business isn't all it's cracked up to be. They want a little bit more balance in their life.
It's that whole life billionaire concept.
Exactly right. Yep.